Hello, and welcome to The Mind of a Therapist, a podcast where I interview psychotherapists and helping professionals and what they're passionate about in order to provide you with messages of encouragement and hope. I'm your host, Andrew Earl. The Mind of a Therapist is sponsored by Psychological Counseling Services, healing hearts and transforming lives. Look into our intensive at pcsearl.com. In today's interview, I interviewed Megan Moran. Megan did her clinical internship at McLean Hospital and stayed on for 13 years as a transition specialist at McLean's Therapeutic High School, Arlington School. After bringing in her students to Cultivate Care Farms on a volunteer trip, she saw the benefit of farm-based therapy for adolescents with mental health issues. That summer, she took a position as a part-time clinician at Cultivate Care Farms and became the director of Cultivate Care Farms in May of 2019. So without further ado, here's my interview with Megan. All right, well, Megan, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for taking the time. I found your website, Cultivate Care Farms, through a Google search. I'm just graduated with a degree in marriage and family therapy, and so in the realms of psychotherapy, and I'm also really interested in agriculture, and so that was a big reason that I sought out a farm-based therapist, and I was happy to stumble upon your website and your work, and I'm really excited to hear a bit about what farm-based therapy looks like. And maybe to start off, will you let the listeners know how you got into farm-based therapy?
Sure. And thank you for having me. So I just kind of fell into it by happenstance. So I used to be a transition specialist at McLean Hospital. So I worked with teenagers with mental health issues, trying to help them figure out what they would do after they graduated high school. And so for a lot of these students, they didn't really envision a future for themselves. So to really sit back and think through what their interests were, what their abilities were, it became important to do different volunteer projects, to work with different populations. And so I live very close to the farm, and the students were interested in doing some sort of outdoor project. So I thought, let's go to the farm, Cultivate Care Farms. And we came here a few springs ago, and it was like seeing my students in a whole new light. So people who, in a therapeutic setting had seemed incredibly vulnerable. All of a sudden, they were showing me how to hold chickens. They were showing me how to feel just more comfortable in my body in a new space. And so I thought that was pretty remarkable, given how much therapeutic support these kids got on a daily basis, that here they seem stronger, more flexible, more willing to try things. And I was actually following their example. So at the time, I was leaving the position and was looking to start my own private practice in transition work with adolescents and young adults. And found out that there was part-time availability here to see clients. So I started here originally as a part-time clinician and just kind of fell in love with it. But prior to being here, aside from working on an organic farm with vegetables, I had not had previous experience working with livestock.
And yeah, so I'm curious, are most of these sessions individual sessions that you do with the farm-based therapy? Do you do groups as well? What does a session look like with livestock, with agriculture?
Yeah, so in farm-based therapy, we are, working with the animals and with the land to create a sustainable environment. So the farm itself kind of functions as a space that we're working to beautify, to keep going, to feed the animals. So sessions are 45 minutes to an hour. We're working with our clients. So instead of like a traditional therapy setting where it's kind of the the expert and the client or the patient. We're actually partners. We're doing chores. I told you I didn't have experience with livestock. I've now helped deliver mini sheep and goat babies alongside my clients. So, I think what's great about the farm is you never know what's going to happen, what you're going to come across. But also, I think just the physical work that we do. So whether that's cleaning up pens, whether that's trimming the hooves of animals, being more physical, being in your body, we have found helps people become vulnerable more quickly. It's just easier to talk about your stuff because the focus is not directly on you. And I think too, sometimes, seeing an animal in pain or seeing an animal do something it's not supposed to, it resonates with people. I've had that experience. Wow, my mom and I, we really get into it too. We don't headbutt, but our conversations kind of feel like that. So sessions vary greatly. We have over 60 animals, and there are probably 18 different clinical spaces, both inside and outside, where you can be with a client. We also do a lot of expressive artwork here. Our wool and our fleece is turned into yarn, so we might be dyeing yarn in the kitchen to sell at our farm stand. We might be testing the freshness of our eggs from our chickens to sell in our farm stand. We might be planting lettuce greens in order to feed our tortoise, stuff like that.
So these experiences with these natural systems with livestock, you often find catalyze getting in touch with experiences that people have had, maybe in ways that traditional talk therapy might. It's more embodied, more experiential.
Yes. I would say that farm-based therapy is tricky in that I think, for some of our clients, it's easier maybe for families to say, like, Johnny goes to the farm every week versus Johnny goes to therapy. So I think sometimes people think that they're not going to get as deep of a therapeutic experience as you would in a traditional setting. And we actually end up having a lot of very complex clients. I think also because, 30% of our clients in the past year, this was the first form of therapy that they've tried. The rest of our clients had tried CBT, DBT, and they had found 95% of those clients had found farm-based therapy to be as effective as those other forms of treatment. So I think, for some people who have tried other forms, sometimes this can feel like a last-ditch effort. For other people, I think what's really helpful is that things that we do here are also applicable when you go home. You can't take your therapist with you, but you can plant a garden. You can, pet your dog when you're feeling really dysregulated, things like that.
Oh, that's good. And will you give some examples of experiences that clients have had, that you have had, that have been impactful or transformational around, maybe someone who's come in with depression, anxiety? What are some ways that you've seen the farm-based therapy really support these folks?
Yeah, we definitely, with the pandemic, we have noticed a lot of school-aged kids who have been isolated kind of come out of the woodwork, especially middle school girls. We're seeing a lot of kind of self-injury earlier on. I think specific sessions that I can think about, working with one of my clients, we have an Angora sheep. He's an Angora goat. His name is Curly. He has huge horns. He looks like a wizard. And he, because he's an Angora goat, his wool and his hooves grow incredibly fast. So we have to trim them a lot. And I think, so we had to take Curly inside the kitchen and get a little help because he is so big and he does have long horns, trimming his hooves, and the experience of kind of thinking about, I think I had said this client had started self-injuring, but thinking about the body as an instrument. And I don't know if a lot of people know this, but goats, I generally consider kind of drama queens. Like if you're going to trim them, they're going to make noise. The sheep are much quieter. But so kind of Curly making noise, Curly, needing to actually bleeding a little bit when we cut too deep on his hooves, allowed the client to say, like, I'm not okay. I'm not. And so this just experience of like how we express pain, how we ask for compassion, and that sometimes I think it takes, a hoof being neglected enough or someone's feelings kind of not being acknowledged or validated enough, where it feels both painful to express those feelings to someone else, but it also, and sometimes, makes it feel easier for us to want to hurt ourselves instead of sharing our pain with others. So, I mean, that's just one example. So another, during the pandemic, something else that has been helpful is that we do chores. Our animals eat twice a day. We clean up their pens. For some kids who have been doing remote learning, they have said, just knowing that I need to come to this other place, because sometimes the farm was the only place where kids were going over the course of the week. And to know that there's still a structure in place, there's still things that need to be done, has helped clients have a sense of purpose and order during a very kind of chaotic and strange time. Another, I think the death and birth experiences are always huge. You can't predict those. But I'm thinking I had a young female client who had two paternal uncles who had committed suicide. The family didn't really talk about it. She had started self-injuring and wasn't able to kind of communicate with her mom her own feelings. And so we actually had a sheep who had given birth, and it was to a stillborn baby. So she wasn't here when that happened, but when she was here, we were able to wrap the baby up. We were able to bury the baby. She planted lilies over the baby so we could kind of reclaim and talk about ways to acknowledge death, and again, ways to acknowledge pain in a way that hadn't, for whatever reason, been done within the house. In terms of like a birth situation, I had a young boy that I was working with who had been kind of abused in utero by his father. And his mom lived with him separately from the father. And so he, at the time, I think was 8. We were closing up the barn for the night and noticed that one of our Nigerian dwarf goats was in labor. So he, called the teen group to come help. I jumped in to help the mom. Goat births are usually pretty difficult and unpredictable. But so she ended up having 2 babies. And this client was the first person to get to touch and hold these babies. And so in some ways he, without even realizing it, is kind of relearning, nurturing and early positive experiences. That's not a situation that I could have set up. That was a situation that the farm kind of presented us with. I think, and in ways that are not as dramatic, but important, I think we have alpacas that are a little standoffish. They're our livestock guardians. So they're always kind of watching out for the herd. They always want to make sure that anybody coming in is safe. They sleep alongside the fence at night to make sure no wolves or coyotes come to try to get the animals. I've noticed that kids with social difficulties will always want to go touch those alpacas, and those are the hardest animals to get close to. So it presents an opportunity to speak about behavioral cues and signals that people send us, that animals send us, to let us know what their needs are, including just needing space. And so I think, we can start to talk about communication. We can talk about confidence. The goats themselves, I would say, are incredibly therapeutic animals, specifically because they don't really have boundaries. They want to be close. They want to be in your space. So for someone who's anxious, depressed, has low self-confidence, which is a symptom that most of our clients have articulated having, it's really wonderful to have this little thing want to sit in your lap, want to stare at you, so I think sometimes for people, just being outside in the sun is helpful. Being able to have safe touch that either you instigate or that the animal instigates can be really helpful. And then in terms of, learning about behavior, again, by kind of social cues that the animals give us, or even looking at herd behavior, like who gets to be in charge, which chicken here is in charge, and how is that determined? And I think you can even see like how difficult with establishing herd and pecking order, that in some ways beings kind of put each other through a lot of difficulty to determine who is in charge. So you can also use the animals as a way to figure out, how to have different relationships with people, to be able to say, like, we're not animals. Like, we don't have to give each other such a hard time to determine who's best. So there's that. I think also just, we have a lot of kids who have ADHD or who are on the spectrum. And so to sit in a room and talk about your feelings is not possible, is not enjoyable. And so for those kids, it can be really helpful to build furniture from our fallen trees for the goats to jump up on. Goats like to get up as high as they can. And so you can actually start to, so I think, aside from, so that physical piece can be incredibly grounding. Using a wheelbarrow is incredibly grounding for your solar plexus. There's pressure and engagement that you do with farm tools that can actually help you focus and be able to talk about your feelings. So even just the physical nature of it without the animals can be helpful.
Absolutely. Well, there's so much there that I was drawn to, and one thing that really leapt out at me with being around death on the farm, I'm drawn to grief work, and I've read Die Wise by Stephen Jenkinson, and there's a number of other people who have written on death and dying too, that talk about how in our culture there's such an absence of discussion about death. There's actually a lot of death phobia, and how out of touch we are with death. And especially as a young person, you pick up these cues from your family members, society, and then as a young person to have someone die, and then no blame on the parents for not knowing how to have those conversations, not having practice having those conversations. But what a powerful experience to then come in contact with death experientially at a farm.
Mm-hmm. I think I wrote about another experience with a ram that we had who died last year. He was getting ready to turn 9, and it was on a Saturday. And we were supposed to have a farm stand in there. It pretty much got rained out, but he had stopped moving. He had some sort of stomach cancer, which created incredible bloat in his body so that he couldn't go to the bathroom. And so he ended up not being able to move from the first part of the barn floor, which is a very public space. He was not making noise. He wasn't in pain, but you could tell he was just done. And so clients had the opportunity to come and say goodbye to him, even clients who weren't being seen that day. And we actually took the flowers from our farm stand that we didn't use. We made a crown for him. We put flowers all along the back of his body. And everybody, got to tell him how important he was to us. We were wearing masks. It was my first experience of having like a really wet mask just from crying beside my clients who were crying. That there are those moments, and it's interesting too, I think, in doing farm-based therapy is deciding like there are some things that you do have control over, ways in which you can actually change nature. And is it important for us to do that or not, to let things happen as they naturally would? So another part of that too is, yes, I think that grief is definitely not something that we display publicly. We don't necessarily know how to process it, or in some ways it feels shameful to. So Percy was the name of the ram. He had been sheared prior to that, and so there was yarn months prior to that that was made, and so we gave bits of his yarn to clients who had, because of the size, he was what you would consider like a gentle giant. He had these really gorgeous horns that spiraled backwards. He was all black. He had the softest wool. But he wasn't, when people saw him at first, they were like, oh my gosh, he's a very large animal. But I think for some people, he was an incredibly calming presence. I had one client who you could kind of tell there was like a father figure thing going on. This was a person who didn't have a lot of positive male role models. And so this is a kid you would never think who would want to, but he, as soon as we had that yarn available, he took a ball of it for himself. So ways in which we can also remember, we're creating a restorative space behind the farm where we are able to bury either the ashes or the bodies of some of our smaller animals, and just to have a space to pause and remember. I will say, last week, unexpectedly, one of our, so this is in terms of deciding how much grief or our own emotions to share with our clients, given that it is supposed to be a therapeutic setting. We had a Nubian goat who, for some inexplicable reason, started seizing. She was 2 months old. She's a favorite on the farm, and you could tell there was a neurological issue going on. She couldn't control her neck. She couldn't use her back legs. And so I sat in the back room with her for an hour waiting for the vet, embracing her so that she didn't hurt herself while she was seizing, and to also just kind of take some of that pressure so that she could have energy until the vet was able to get there. And so I was pretty sure she was going to die. And I couldn't stop bawling. And so it felt like, even though I had clients, that emotion was so intense, and what was going to happen was so unpredictable, that it didn't feel like in the moment that was something, it had just crossed a line of kind of grief to not be shared, like grief kind of out of control. I think that was a lot more surprising than as Percy was aging and as we were seeing his decline. But in those moments, I think as a staff, we have about 13 clinicians here. We see over 120 clients a week. In that moment, in that back room holding the animal, everybody else kind of knew what was going on clinician wise. People would come back. I had my mask on. People were wiping my tears because I couldn't move my arms from holding the goat. The goat, inexplicably, the vet will tell you, is still here with us today. Harriet, named after Harriet Tubman, who I found out from my daughter also had seizures and insomnia. But I think, yes, that was an incredibly, for me in some ways, therapeutic moment, in the sense that just the fragility of life, and one day here, the next day not. I mean, I think I lost a few years last week doing that, but in some ways it also felt very much like a gift, because being incredibly upset, there were other clients who came and gave. So these are people with mental health issues. These are people who deal with grief on a daily basis. They get up with grief. They go to bed with grief. These people were incredibly strong. These were people who could tend to Harriet and not be so beside themselves like I was. So in some ways, I really started to see the strength of people with mental health issues, because those are the people when crisis happens, they exist in crisis. so I was both, it all felt like a gift. But I was so impressed with our clients. And, you know, I don't always want those opportunities to be there, but I think what I love about this work, and I love about farm-based therapy, is these constant opportunities to demonstrate compassion. And I think a lot of kids, a lot of adolescents don't realize that they have it until they're brought to a situation where they have to use it. I mean, I think at the farm, you just see so much goodness coming out of people. And I think that allows people to see their strength, and that allows and helps people push through, and have hope, I think.
Yeah. And that, I was struck by a lot that you were saying there. The first piece, just, you know, as that older goat was dying and the members of, you know, the community were able to come in and outside of the therapy hour have therapeutic exchanges with this goat and, you know, say their goodbyes and then keep this goat's fur with them.
Can I say just that he was a sheep? He was
sheep,
a ram.
Sorry, not yeah. And then the parallel process that you're talking about there for clinicians in this setting too, as you're confronted with dying yourself, and that showing you the work of Froma Walsh on resilience came up to me, seeing the resilience of the people who consult us and the impact that has on the clients, us viewing them as more resilient and capable. And then them, it seems like the experiences on the farm catalyzing empowerment, and them seeing themselves maybe as more capable and resilient than they might have if they wouldn't have had those experiences.
Right. Yeah, I think there are lots of demonstrations of strength, which is what I was, you know, first captivated by, is just to see the strength of people who are usually considered incredibly vulnerable and fragile. Yeah, they're kind of anything but. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I'm curious, I know that from my understanding, it doesn't seem like farm-based therapy is widely accessible throughout the country. I'm sure there's, you know, will be continued movement in this direction because these experiences sound very powerful. I've had personal experiences in wilderness settings that have, you know, been profoundly impactful for me. And I'm wondering what sort of messages you might have for both a therapist and, you know, everyday person around what they might do to connect more with the natural world, with, you know, if they don't have farm-based therapy, what sort of message would you want to give to people?
I mean, I definitely think there are just different aspects to this work that have really changed me and given me more appreciation for life. Yeah, I think opportunities to volunteer in outdoor settings or with animals or on farms is a great idea. I found out I used to be afraid of chickens. Now I have my own. I think being able to observe animals in their natural setting is profoundly helpful. We just took some Nubian goats and some silky chickens to a high school for someone's senior project, and we did positive and negative affect scales before and after. These high school students spent time with these animals, and the change is, I mean, it's, people know that animals do positive things for us, but when you actually see how far those numbers move, it's amazing.
Wow.
I also think making things, I'm big into making. I know that, when I'm using my hands, my thoughts are able to slow down. So I love the idea of um, dyeing yarn, knitting yarn for somebody else, milking a goat, turning the milk into soap, using um, herbs or flowers from your garden in there, or making a candle with these. Like, I think finding ways to, like, and also in terms of, I think having chickens, the first time that your chicken lays an egg, it's awesome. It's
Yeah, absolutely.
you like can't believe that came out of a chicken. And sometimes it's just really beautiful colors like green and blue. And I think finding ways to note that kind of original magic, the things that we've really gotten away from, that we just buy them out of a carton and out of the fridge. Like, I think part of doing this work is so much learning about things that our ancestors knew all along. So and there's still a ton to learn, but I think getting back to just our origins is incredibly helpful and can take away from the distractions that stress us out and make us sad. Yeah.
Absolutely. I deeply resonate with that. I didn't grow up cooking very much, but in my adult life, I've started to develop a passion for cooking, and I'm still not a great cook, but I was just visiting with my friends, and one of my friends who had known me in college before I got into cooking, he was like, "You just spent 2 hours in the kitchen." I was like, "Yeah, I love it, and
Yeah.
that I've had chickens too. That excitement of the laying an egg, and I've been getting into fermentation as well, and it's just
Wow.
amazing to me. Salt
Yeah.
water, vegetable, and it's always a surprise. It's living bacteria that we're playing a part with,
Yeah.
evolving into something that's incredibly nourishing to us, tastes good, easier to digest.
Yeah.
So I love that. You're preaching to the choir here.
I also don't know, was something we did the first time this year, which I had never done before, is we tapped our maple trees. It is amazing.
Oh,
It comes out of trees.
wow. That's got to be maple syrup too. There's not much better than maple syrup. That's funny.
Yeah, but I think participating in these natural slow processes is really helpful.
Absolutely. Well,
Yeah.
and we're about getting to the end of the conversation here. The message I like to pose at the end is what's a message of hope that you'd like to leave the listeners with today?
Yeah, I would say that when people are given opportunities to demonstrate compassion and strength, most of the time they will. Like, I think that we don't know how much goodness we have around us in the people that are around us. And so, if those opportunities aren't available, just the belief of knowing that that people are generally good and have natural
Mm,
things inside them, to they just innately know how to help and care for others. They just don't always have the opportunity to demonstrate that.
mm. No, that's powerful. And if people want to get in touch with you, want to check out the farm, you all are based in Massachusetts, right?
Yes, we're in Bolton, Massachusetts.
Okay, where'd be a good place to direct people if they want to get in touch with you or the farm?
Yeah, so if they go to our website at cultivatefarms.org, when you go to the contact page, just give us a little blurb about yourself, and it'll get directed towards me. People can reference this podcast if that's helpful.
Perfect. And
Yeah.
I didn't ask, is it mostly people who are local to your area who are your clients, or do people come for from out of the state for sessions?
We mostly have people who are in state. We would like to find, as you had said before, ways to reach a more urban audience or people who don't have as much exposure, have never touched a goat. We want to find ways to be more mobile. You had asked another question that I forgot. Oh, we have had people express interest in learning more about farm-based therapy, a lot of people from other states. So I definitely see interest is burgeoning. So we're trying to find ways to share with people what it is we do so that they can do it in their space as well.
Oh, that's exciting. And we'll leave the website URL in the show notes if people want to get in touch with you. And thanks so much for being on the podcast today, Megan.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew.
Please press the subscribe button, as well as rating and reviewing our podcast. This helps others connect with what you've been hearing. If you have any questions, please contact us at themindofatherapist@gmail.com. These questions will be kept anonymous. I want to thank Eric Price for the wonderful music you hear in this podcast. Additionally, this podcast was created to provide accurate and authoritative information on the subject matter. Although we are interviewing licensed therapists, they are not your therapists. This podcast is not intended to serve as direct medical advice and should not be used as a substitute for direct professional help. It is given with the understanding that neither the host, publisher, guests, or PCS are rendering legal, clinical, or other professional information. If you need a professional, we encourage you to find one. Visit Psychology Today to connect with a licensed clinician near you.